title this morning is regarding the other, and I think you can probably hear that theme running through our readings this morning. I wondered at the pronouncement Jesus makes. Jesus said, "I assure you that anyone who has left house, brothers, sisters, mothers, father, children, or farms because of me and because of the good news will receive 100 times as much now in this life. Houses, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and farms with harassment. And in the coming age, eternal life with harassment." Now that's what they teach you to do in seminary. It's like, what doesn't really make sense here? And I thought, with harassment. So would God offer us these things in heaven, particularly the farms, it seems, and have us beleaguered with harassment? This line, as I said, was bewildering to me, so I went looking for some help with it. Apparently, what the author intends is that unless we have suffered some form of harassment, when we have left everything behind to follow Jesus, then we will receive all of these things in heaven. So, oh my, we have to walk away from things we love, which is painful enough, and then suffer harassment to live splendidly in heaven? What is Jesus thinking? Well, I'll give us a hint. We read in the very first verse that Jesus is continuing down the road. In the previous chapter, chapter 9, Jesus is doing his very best, trying to tell his disciples he is about to die. It begins in verse 30. From there, Jesus and his followers went through Galilee, but he didn't want anyone to know it. This was because he was teaching his disciples. The human one will be delivered into human hands. They will kill him, he said. 3 days after he is killed, he will rise up. But they didn't understand this kind of talk, and they were afraid to ask him. Now, consider what Jesus is about to give up. Looking at it through this lens, we may see what takes place a little differently when then this rich man runs up to him and asks him what he must do to obtain eternal life. It dawns on me why Jesus looked at him carefully and loved him. Jesus knew as surely as he was walking toward his death that he was about to ask the man to pay a price that he may not be willing to pay. Jesus was asking for this man's life. Could it be that he looked at him carefully and loved him because the man's question seemed to come with the innocence of a child? As the question spilled from the man's lips, this man, he had no real idea what response it would provoke from Jesus, what would really be asked of him. Can't you feel Jesus loving him in all of his eager ignorance? He asked this as Jesus is continuing down the road to his impending execution. But we know the man was dismayed at this statement and went away saddened because he had many possessions. The request was too great. The suffering he felt too great. Conversely, the man suffers ultimately because of his possessions. He is saddened that he cannot have eternal life and enjoy the pleasures of a wealthy one here on earth. He refused to hold the cross held out to him. Now we come to the heart of Jesus' meaning. It isn't that his wealth is a sin. It's his attachment to the wealth. That's the problem. Notice, this man, he follows the law, prescribed actions, points that he needs to achieve, but is not fully immersed in the community, responding to its needs or the needs of its people. Jesus asked him to tend to the poor. Jesus isn't asking each of us, as easy as that would be for a sermon for me, to give up all of our worldly goods. What he is asking is for us to give up what it is that holds us back from regarding the needs of the other. What cross do we ultimately refuse to take from Jesus? What is the one thing that holds us back from living our true Christian lives? Maybe it is money, but it can be many things that we turn our backs on in the Bible because, like the rich man, it might make us uncomfortable at the very least. And at the most, we may suffer some form of harassment. The harassment could be that people judge our actions and maybe they don't associate with us anymore. I'm not sure if you find this good news. I'd say it's a stretch. But Jesus to the rescue. He reassures us that many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. Does that reassure us? So what are we to make of that? Do we turn away dismayed and saddened that Jesus asks us to shuck these encumbrances, to be able to see someone else's life for what it actually is? Will Willimon was bishop of the North Alabama Conference. He tells this story as one interpretation of the reading from the book, where resident aliens live. So I'm going to warn you in advance, the lesson of the story is as brutally jarring as Jesus' response to the rich man. The story is told that Clarence Jordan, a great Southern social prophet, visited an integrated church in the deep South. Jordan was surprised to find a relatively large church so thoroughly integrated, not only black and white, but also rich and poor, and this was in the early 60s too. Jordan asked the old country preacher, "How did you get the church this way?" "What way?" the preacher asked. Jordan went on to explain his surprise at finding a church so integrated, and in the South too. The preacher said, "Well, when our preacher left our small church, I went to the deacons and said, 'I'll be the preacher.' The first Sunday as preacher, I opened the book and read, 'As many of you has been baptized into Jesus, has put on Jesus. And there is no longer any Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, males or females, because you all is one in Jesus.' He said, then I closed the book and I said, 'If you are one with Jesus, you are one with all kinds of folks. And if you ain't, well, you ain't.'" Jordan asked what happened after that. "Well," the preacher said, "the deacons took me into the back room and they told me that they didn't want to hear that kind of preaching no more." Jordan asked what he did then. "I fired them deacons," the preacher roared. "Then what happened?" asked Jordan. "Well," said the old hillbilly preacher, "I preached that church down to 4 people. The miracle is, this is my commentary, not long after that, it started growing, and it grew. And I found out that revivals sometimes don't mean bringing people in, but getting people out that don't dare to love Jesus. That don't dare to love Jesus, just like our rich man in our gospel reading." Willimon continues on to say, but maybe I'm speaking too negatively here. Is there anyone out there who thinks that this story, in which Jesus seems so prickly, so difficult and demanding, is anybody out there who thinks this may be good news? So he continues. He used to teach college, and he said, "One night in a college dormitory Bible study, I presented the same story of Jesus and the rich man. I then asked the gathered students, "What do you make of this story?" "Has Jesus ever met this man before?" asked one of the students. "Why do you ask?" says Mom. "Because Jesus seems to have a lot of faith in him. He demands something risky, radical of him. I wonder if Jesus knew this man had a gift for risky, radical response. I wondered what there was about this man that made Jesus have so much faith he could really be a disciple." Now Willimon's thinking, wow, didn't think about that. Another student pipes up and says thoughtfully, "I wish Jesus would ask something like this of me. My parents totally control my life just because they are paying all my bills. And I complain about them calling the shots, but I am so tied to all this stuff, I don't think I could ever break free. Maybe Jesus thinks otherwise." "Well, I was astounded," says Willimon, "but what I had heard as severe, demanding, bad news, these students heard as gracious and good news. Jesus invites people to be his disciples. Divest, break free, let go of your stuff, follow me. I believe you can do it." Willimon concludes, such is the peril and the promise of being met by Jesus. So I ask you, what could it be that holds us back from giving someone a chance? Maybe seeing them the way they wish to be seen. If Jesus can regard someone as highly as he does this rich man, and this is Jesus who wanders about without a home, likely one robe to his name, who is it that we can see differently? Who is it that needs us to see them differently? What situation might require us to look at it differently? Transformation is one of the most difficult things that Jesus demands of us. We can get stuck in patterns that we created a long time ago. Jesus looks at us carefully and loves us. Yes, us. He says, "You are lacking one thing. Go and fix it." And it isn't that God requires proof of our faithfulness, but our faithfulness ought to show some outward signs of an inward grace freely given to us by God.